The road to Hollow Cove got narrower the farther she drove. First it was 2 lanes, lined with maple trees whose leaves were just beginning to turn. Then it was 1 lane, with stone walls on either side and the occasional mailbox tilted at a drunken angle. Then it was dirt, and the trees gave way to sky. And suddenly there was the ocean, gray and vast and moving slowly, like it was breathing. Clara pulled over and turned off the engine. The silence was the first thing she noticed. Not the absence of sound, but the presence of it. The waves, the wind in the grass, a gull somewhere far away. In Boston, silence was something you paid for. Here, it was just there, waiting. She had driven 4 hours to get here. 4 hours from a city where she'd spent the last 6 years designing logos for companies she didn't care about, staring at a screen until her eyes burned, lying awake at night wondering when her life had started to feel like a shirt that was 2 sizes too small. Grandma Eleanor had left her the cottage in the will. The lawyer had called 3 weeks ago, his voice gentle and official. A small property in Hollow Cove, Maine, your grandmother's residence. She left it to you with no conditions. Clara had almost said sell it. Almost. But something in her, the part that was tired, the part that hadn't slept through the night in months, had said, I'd like to see it first. So here she was. The cottage sat at the end of a rutted dirt path, perched on a cliff that overlooked the cove. It was small, white clapboard, a slate roof, a porch that wrapped around 2 sides. Flower boxes under the windows held dried stalks of lavender, their color faded, but their scent still lingering in the cool air. A stone chimney rose from the roof, and a thin curl of smoke rose from it. Wait. Smoke. Clara frowned. She'd been told the house had been empty since Eleanor died in March. 6 months empty. Who would be? The front door opened and a man stepped out. He was tall and weathered, with white hair and a beard that needed trimming, and he was holding a hammer. He looked at Clara's car, then at Clara, and smiled. You must be Clara, he said. His voice was deep and slow like the ocean. I'm Tom Hale. I was a friend of your grandmother's. I've been keeping an eye on the place. Started a fire in the hearth. Thought you'd want it warm when you got here. Clara got out of the car. The air hit her, cold, salty, clean. You didn't have to do that, I know. Eleanor would have wanted it. He nodded toward the door. Come on in. I'll show you around, and then I'll leave you be. The cottage smelled like wood smoke and lavender and something else, something old and soft, like the inside of a book. The main room had a stone fireplace with a fire already crackling, a worn sofa facing it, a kitchen nook with a window that looked out at the ocean. Everything was small and neat and well-loved. There were books everywhere, stacked on shelves, piled on the floor, tucked into the gaps of the staircase. Eleanor read more than anyone I've ever known, Tom said, following her gaze. Said books were company that never let you down. Clara ran her finger along the spine of a poetry collection. The cover was worn soft. She never talked about this place. Not much, anyway. She didn't talk about herself much. But she loved this house. Loved the Cove. Tom paused. You know she was the lantern keeper, right? Clara shook her head. Come on. I'll show you. He led her up a narrow staircase to the attic. The door stuck a little, and Tom pushed it open with his shoulder. Sunlight poured through a round window at the far end, illuminating a room that took Clara's breath away. Along one wall, in a neat row, were 7 lanterns. Not electric. Real lanterns with glass chimneys and wicks and small reservoirs of oil at the base. They were polished clean, their brass fittings gleaming. On a small table beneath them was a leather-bound journal, its pages soft with use. Eleanor lit these every night, Tom said. One for each section of the harbor path. She'd walk the path at dusk, light them one by one. The whole village could see them. Said it was the least she could do, make sure everyone found their way home. Clara stepped closer. The lanterns were beautiful, simple, functional, cared for. She picked up the journal and opened it. The first entry was dated 40 years ago, in Eleanor's looping handwriting, October 3rd. First night as keeper. The wind was fierce, but all 7 stayed lit. A fisherman waved from his boat. I think I'm going to like this. The last entry was dated March 12th, 2 days before Eleanor died. March 12th. The lanterns are ready. Whoever comes next, be gentle with them. They've been in the dark a long time. Clara closed the journal. Her eyes were warm. Tom was watching her quietly. You don't have to take it up, you know. The lanterns. Some of the younger folks have been talking about putting in electric lights, but I think Eleanor hoped you'd at least try. It was getting late. The sun was sinking toward the ocean, painting the sky in shades of peach and lavender. Through the round attic window, Clara could see the harbor path, a narrow stone walkway that curved along the edge of the cove, with 7 iron posts where the lanterns hung, now dark. I'll try, she said. Tom smiled. I'll leave you to it. There's oil in the cupboard by the door. A long match, too, if you need anything. Anything at all. I live in the blue house at the bottom of the hill. Door's always open. He left. Clara heard his boots on the porch, the crunch of gravel, then the sound of his truck starting and driving away. She was alone. She picked up the first lantern. It was heavier than she expected, solid and warm in her hands. She carried it down the stairs, through the kitchen, out onto the porch. The air had turned cold, and the first stars were coming out. She walked to the first post. She hung the lantern, lit the wick with the long match, and stepped back. The flame caught. It flickered once, twice, then settled into a steady golden glow. Clara stood there for a long moment, watching it. The waves rolled in below. The wind moved through the grass. Somewhere a dog barked once, then went quiet. She picked up the second lantern and walked to the next post, and then the third. By the time she lit the 7th, the sky was dark, and the harbor path glowed with 7 small warm lights, and Clara Bennett, who had driven 4 hours to sell a house she'd never seen, stood at the end of the path and felt something she hadn't felt in years. She felt like she could breathe. Clara woke up to the sound of waves, not the recorded kind on a white noise app, the real kind, slow and rhythmic, coming through the open bedroom window. She lay still for a moment, confused, then remembered. The cottage. Hollow Cove. The lanterns. She sat up. The room was small and bright, with a quilt that smelled like lavender, and a window that framed the ocean like a painting. She'd slept 8 hours. Straight through. She couldn't remember the last time that had happened. Downstairs, the fire had burned down to embers. She put on a kettle and stood at the kitchen window, watching the cove wake up. A fishing boat was heading out, its engine a low putter across the water. Smoke rose from a chimney in the village. The harbor path was empty, but the 7 lanterns still hung there, their flames gone now, their glass chimneys faintly smudged with last night's soot. There was a knock at the door. Tom was on the porch, holding 2 paper cups and a brown paper bag. Morning, he said. Brought coffee, and Marin's cinnamon rolls. Figured you wouldn't have groceries yet. Clara let him in. The coffee was strong and black, the way she liked it, though she hadn't told him that. The cinnamon roll was warm, the glaze still sticky, and when she bit into it, she made a sound that she would have been embarrassed about if Tom hadn't been already eating his own. Good, right? He said. Maureen's been baking since 4 a.m. Says the best bread happens while the rest of the world is asleep. They sat at the kitchen table by the window. Tom showed her how to clean the lanterns, wipe the glass with newspaper and vinegar, trim the wicks, refill the oil. Eleanor did this every morning, he said. Said it was her meditation. Didn't listen to the radio, didn't think about anything, just cleaned. Clara liked the sound of that. After breakfast, they walked the harbor path together. The morning air was sharp and clean, and the tide was out, leaving pools of seawater in the rocks that glinted like scattered mirrors. Tom stopped at each lantern and told her a little story about it. This first one, Eleanor called it the welcome. Light, said it was the first thing people saw when they came home. He wiped the glass with a rag. This one's the fisherman's light. Old Mr. Kowalski paid for it back in '89, after Eleanor lit his way home in a storm. This one here, he gestured to the third, is the children's light. The kids in the village saved up their allowance for it. They were 7 years old. Now they're in their 30s, some of them with kids of their own. By the time they reached the 7th lantern, Clara's hands were busy and her mind was quiet. She hadn't thought about her old job once. Not once. "Come on," Tom said. "I'll walk you into the village. You should meet Marin properly, and you'll need groceries." The village was tiny. One main street, a handful of houses, a general store, and a bakery with a hand-painted sign that said, "Marin's Bread." The door chimed when they walked in, and the smell hit Clara like a hug. Yeast and cinnamon and coffee, and something sweet she couldn't name. A woman looked up from behind the counter. She was tall, with dark skin and silver hair pulled back in a scarf, and she had the kind of smile that made you feel like you'd been expected. "You must be Clara," she said, wiping flour from her hands. "I'm Marin. Eleanor talked about you all the time. Said you were the smartest person she knew." Clara blinked. "She did? Every week. My granddaughter Clara," she'd say. "Designs things in Boston. Works too hard. Doesn't sleep enough." Marin's smile softened. "She worried about you." Clara's throat felt tight. She looked away, at the loaves of bread lined up on the shelf. "The lights were on last night," Marin said. "The whole village noticed. My grandson, he's 6. He looked out the window and said, 'Grandma, the stars came down to the water.'" She reached under the counter and pulled out a paper bag. "Here, sourdough, for your dinner. And don't argue. Eleanor always took a loaf on Saturdays, and I'm not breaking tradition now." As they left the bakery, an old man sitting on a bench outside tipped his hat to Clara. "Good to see the lights back," he said. "Thank you, miss." A little girl on a bicycle slowed down as she passed, staring at Clara with wide eyes. "Are you the new lantern lady?" she asked. Clara smiled. "I think I might be." The girl grinned and pedaled away. That evening, Clara walked the harbor path alone. She carried the lanterns one by one, hung them on their posts, lit them with the long match. She knew their names now: the welcome light, the fisherman's light, the children's light. She'd cleaned them that morning. She knew which wick burned a little low, which glass had a crack that Tom said he'd fix. When she reached the 7th lantern, she stopped and looked back. 7 golden lights curved along the harbor, warm and steady against the darkening water. A fishing boat was coming in, and she could see the man at the helm raise a hand in greeting. She raised hers back. The walk home was quiet. The crickets were singing. The waves were soft. And when Clara opened the cottage door, the fire was still going. Tom must have come by and stoked it while she was out. And the room was warm. And there was a loaf of sourdough on the table. And she thought, maybe she could stay a little longer. The 3rd morning, Clara found the letter in a book. She was dusting the shelves in the living room, something she'd never done in her Boston apartment, where dust was just part of the ambiance, when a slip of paper slid out from between the pages of a worn copy of To the Lighthouse. It was folded in half, and on the front, in Eleanor's looping handwriting, were the words, "For the girl who will need this someday." Clara sat down on the floor and opened it. "My dear Clara, if you're reading this, you've found the cottage. You've probably already decided to sell it. That's all right. I would have too at your age. There are so many other places to be, so many things to do, and a small house on a cliff in Maine can feel like the end of the world. But let me tell you something I didn't learn until I was your age, and maybe a little older. I left this cove when I was 22. I went to Boston. I got a job in a department store. I met your grandfather. I had your mother. I lived in a house with a lawn and a driveway and neighbors I never spoke to. I was busy. I was important. I was miserable, but I didn't know that yet. Your grandfather died when your mother was 12. I stayed in Boston for another 10 years, and then one night, I woke up, and I couldn't breathe. Not because I was sick, because the walls were too close. Because I hadn't heard the ocean in 10 years, because I'd forgotten what silence sounded like. I came home. I was afraid the village would have forgotten me. But Tom's father was still here, and the bakery was still here, and the harbor path was still here, dark and waiting. And that's when I became the lantern keeper. The lanterns didn't save me. Nothing that dramatic, but they gave me something to do with my hands when my mind was too loud. They gave me a reason to walk outside every evening, even when I didn't want to. They gave me a way to say, I'm here. I see you. Come home safe. You don't have to be the lantern keeper, Clara. But if you are, if you even try, you'll understand what I mean. Love always. Grandma. Clara folded the letter and put it in her pocket. She sat on the floor for a long time, listening to the fire pop and the waves roll in. And she thought about her grandmother, the woman who'd baked her cookies every Christmas, who'd taught her to knit, who'd never once mentioned a cottage in Maine, or a harbor path or 7 lanterns. She'd been lonely too, Clara realized. She'd been tired too, and she'd found her way back. She walked to the bakery at mid-morning, the letter still in her pocket. Marin was pulling a tray of croissants from the oven, and the whole shop smelled like butter and warmth. She looked up and smiled. You look like you've been thinking. I found a letter, Clara said. From my grandmother. Hidden in a book. Marin wiped her hands on her apron. She was always hiding things in books. Said they were the safest place. No one ever reads the books on the shelf. They just look at them. She poured a cup of coffee and slid it across the counter. What did it say? She said she left here when she was 22. Went to Boston. Didn't come back for 20 years. Marin nodded slowly. I remember when she came back. I was a girl, maybe 10. She was different from the other women in the village. She'd been places. She knew things. But she was sad too. I could tell. Kids can always tell when adults are sad. She paused. The lanterns helped. After she started lighting them, she smiled more. Started talking to people. Became part of the village again. Did she ever talk about why she left? Marin thought about it. She said the Cove felt too small when she was young. Said she wanted to see the world. And she did, but then the world felt too big, and she came back. She shrugged. I think most of us do that in one way or another. Leave. Come back. Leave again. It's just the going that's hard. Clara sipped her coffee. The letter was warm against her leg through her pocket. Did she ever talk about me? Marin's smile softened. Every day. She had a photo of you on the counter. You were graduating from college, holding a diploma, grinning like you'd conquered the world. She'd point at it and say, That's my Clara. She's going to change everything. And then she'd sigh and say, I just hope she remembers to sleep. Clara laughed. It came out a little wet. Marin reached under the counter and pulled out a knitted scarf. Soft, gray, with tiny stitches that formed a pattern of waves. She made this, for you. She said you'd need it when you came here because the wind off the ocean is colder than you think. She held it out. She was right about most things. Clara took the scarf. It was soft and smelled like lavender, and when she wrapped it around her neck, it felt like a hug from someone who'd been gone for 6 months but had somehow known exactly what she'd need. That evening, the wind was cold. Clara wrapped Eleanor's scarf around her neck and walked the harbor path with the lanterns. The sky was clear, and the stars were so bright they looked close enough to touch. She lit each one slowly, carefully, the way Tom had taught her, and when she reached the 7th, she sat on a nearby rock and looked out at the water. A fishing boat was coming in. Its lights bobbed on the dark water, small and steady, and Clara thought about what Eleanor had written. I'm here. I see you. Come home safe. She raised a hand to the boat. The man at the helm raised his back. She sat there for a long time, the scarf warm around her neck, the lantern glowing beside her, the waves rolling in slow and steady. And for the first time since she was a little girl, she felt like her grandmother was close. Not in a ghost story way. In a quiet way, in the way the wind moved through the grass, in the way the lantern flame stayed steady even when the wind picked up, in the way a scarf could smell like lavender after 6 months in a drawer. She got up and walked home. The cottage was warm. The fire was going, Tom again. On the table there was a note. Saw your light from my porch. Good job, Tisalera smiled. She poured herself a glass of water, sat on the sofa, and opened to the lighthouse again. She read for an hour, the fire crackling, the waves outside, the scarf still around her neck. When she went to bed, she left the book open on the nightstand. And the letter, folded carefully, went inside it, back where it had been waiting, but now it had been red. Now it had done its work. The fog came in on the fourth afternoon. Clara noticed it first from the kitchen window, a soft grayness at the edge of the horizon, like someone had dipped the world in watercolor and let it bleed. By 3 o'clock it had reached the cove. By 4, the fishing boats at the dock were just dark shapes, and the other side of the harbor was gone entirely. There was a knock at the door. Tom was on the porch wearing a yellow oilskin jacket, his hair damp. "Fog's going to be thick tonight," he said. "Thicker than I've seen in a while. You still planning to light the lanterns?" "Of course," he nodded. "Good. They need it more on nights like this. Boats get disoriented, can't tell the harbor from the rocks. The lanterns are the only thing that says, 'Come this way.'" He paused. "Be careful on the path. The stones get slippery. And if you hear an engine that sounds lost, stay where you are. Don't go down to the water. Just make sure the lights are bright." Clara promised she would. After Tom left, she prepared the lanterns with more care than usual. She trimmed every wick to the exact length Tom had shown her. She filled each reservoir to the top with oil. She wiped the glass chimneys until they gleamed, because she'd read somewhere, maybe in Eleanor's journal, that clean glass made the light carry farther in fog. By 6 o'clock, the fog was so thick she could barely see the end of the porch. The world had been reduced to a small circle of gray around the cottage, and the sound of the waves was muffled, like they were coming from underwater. Everything was quiet. Too quiet. She put on Eleanor's scarf, grabbed the long matches and a flashlight, and started down the path. The first lantern was the hardest. Her hands were shaking a little, not from cold, but from something else. Awe, maybe. The fog was beautiful and strange, like walking through a dream where nothing was solid and nothing was certain. She lit the wick, adjusted the flame, and stepped back. The lantern glowed, a small warm sun in the gray, and she could see its light diffusing through the fog, soft and golden, reaching farther than she expected. She moved to the second. Then the third. Each one was a small victory, a point of warmth in the cold gray world. By the fifth she had found her rhythm. Hang, light, adjust, step back, breathe. The fog swirled around her, and the lanterns behind her were just glowing smudges, but they were there. They were on. She was lighting the seventh when she heard it. An engine. Far out in the fog, stuttering and uncertain, moving back and forth like it was looking for something. A boat, lost. Clara's heart sped up. She remembered Tom's words. Stay where you are. Make sure the lights are bright. She finished lighting the seventh lantern, then checked all of them again, walking back along the path, making sure each flame was steady. Each glass was clean. Each light was doing its work. The engine sound grew louder, then softer, then louder again. The boat circling in the fog, searching. She stood at the end of the path, at the seventh lantern, and waited. She had the flashlight in her hand, but she didn't turn it on. Tom said the lanterns were better, steady and true, while a flashlight could confuse. So she stood, and she waited, and she watched the 7 golden lights curve through the fog like a path made of stars. The engine grew louder. She could hear voices now, men's voices, tense, calling to each other. And then, slowly, a shape emerged from the gray. The bow of a fishing boat, small and weathered, creeping toward the harbor entrance, guided by the lights. It passed within 20 feet of where she stood. She could see the man at the wheel, middle-aged, bearded, his face tight with relief. He saw her, and he waved. She waved back. The boat nosed into the harbor, and the engine sound softened as it tied up at the dock. Clara let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Her hands were cold. Her scarf was damp. But she was smiling. She walked back along the path, past the 7 glowing lanterns, and the fog seemed less frightening now. It was just weather, just water in the air, and the lights, her lights, were cutting through it, one small flame at a time. When she got back to the cottage, there was a thermos on the porch. Hot cocoa, still warm, with a note. Heard the boat. Good work. Tishi brought it inside, poured it into a mug and sat by the fire. The cocoa was sweet and warm, and she could still see the lanterns glowing through the fog from the kitchen window. 7 small golden smudges, steady and true. She thought about Eleanor, doing this same walk on nights just like this. 40 years of foggy nights, of lighting the way, of standing at the end of the path and waiting for boats to come home. She thought about what Marin had said. Kids can always tell when adults are sad. And the lanterns helped Eleanor smile more. Clara sipped her cocoa. She wasn't sad tonight. She wasn't tired or anxious or wondering what she was doing with her life. She was just here, in a warm cottage, by a fire, with 7 lanterns glowing in the fog, and a thermos of cocoa on the table, and a note from a man who cared enough to leave it. She was home. She met old Peg at the general store. He was sitting on a wooden bench outside, whittling a piece of wood, when Clara walked up for kerosene and a loaf of bread. He looked up at her with pale blue eyes that seemed to see everything, and he smiled. "You're Eleanor's girl," he said. "It wasn't a question. I am. She was a good woman. Best lantern keeper we ever had. Present company not excluded." He set down his knife. "You know the story, don't you? Of how the lanterns started." Clara shook her head. "Come on, then. Walk with me." He was slower than he looked, leaning on a walking stick carved with the same wave pattern as Eleanor's scarf. But he moved with the unhurried certainty of someone who'd walked these roads for 80 years. They went down to the harbor, past the boats, to a weathered bench that faced the water. 130 years ago, old Peg said, settling onto the bench. There was a woman named Margaret Hale. Her husband was a fisherman. He went out one morning in November, and the fog came in, and he never came back. Clara sat quietly. They searched for 3 days. Nothing. Margaret, she was 24, with a baby on the way. She didn't believe he was gone. Every night she walked the harbor path with a lantern. Just one lantern at first. She'd stand at the end and call his name. The village thought she was crazy with grief. He paused, looking out at the water. Then one night, a fishing boat got lost in the fog. Same kind of night as last night. And they saw Margaret's lantern. Just one light bobbing in the dark. And they followed it home. Old Peg smiled. After that, other women started bringing lanterns. They'd walk the path with Margaret. Not because they were waiting for someone, because they wanted to help. One lantern became 3, became 5, became 7. Margaret lived to be 82. She lit the lanterns every night until the week she died. "And then?" Clara asked. "And then the village kept the tradition. Different women, different years, but always someone. Eleanor was the longest, 40 years. He looked at Clara. "She used to sit right here on this bench, same spot. Said it was the best place in the Cove to think." Clara looked at the bench, at the worn wood where generations of lantern keepers had sat. "Did she ever talk about me?" "All the time," old Peg's voice was gentle. "She said you were like her, too busy, too tired, too afraid to stop. She said she hoped you'd find your way here someday, not because she wanted you to take over the lanterns, because she wanted you to find what she found. What did she find? Peace. Quiet. The feeling that you're exactly where you're supposed to be." He stood up slowly. "She left something for you, you know, in the journal, the last page. She told me to make sure you found it." Clara went home and opened the journal. She'd read the entries, 40 years of weather notes, of boats guided home, of small village moments. But she'd skipped the last page, thinking it was blank. It wasn't March 14th, 2 days after the last entry, 2 days before Eleanor died. "My dearest Clara, if you've read this far, you've already lit the lanterns. You've already walked the path. You've already felt what I felt. That quiet, steady feeling of doing something that matters, even if it's small. I'm not going to tell you to stay. That's not my choice to make. But I will tell you this. The cottage is yours. The lanterns are yours. This cove is yours if you want it. You don't have to be the lantern keeper forever. You don't have to be anything forever. But you can stay a while. You can rest. You can let the ocean be loud, so your mind can be quiet. I waited too long to come home. I don't want you to wait too long either. Whatever you choose, I'm proud of you. I always was. Love, Grandma Clara closed the journal. She sat on the sofa by the fire, the journal in her lap, and she cried, not sad tears, but the kind that come when something you didn't know was missing finally clicks into place. That evening, she lit the lanterns. All 7, and when she reached the end of the path, she didn't turn around right away. She stood there, looking out at the water, and she made her decision. She was staying, not forever. Maybe not even for a year. But for now, for as long as it took, for as long as the lanterns needed her, and she needed them. She walked home, and she called her old boss in Boston. She told him she wasn't coming back. She told him she'd found something else. He was confused. She didn't explain. Some things you can't explain over the phone. She made herself tea. She sat by the fire. She looked at the journal on the table, at the scarf on the hook by the door, at the 7 lanterns glowing through the window. And for the first time in her life, Clara Bennett didn't feel like she was waiting for something to start. She felt like it had already begun. The first week of staying was the easiest. There was always something to do. Lanterns to clean, shelves to dust, bread to buy from Marin, walks to take with Tom when he stopped by in the mornings. The village accepted her the way small villages do. Quietly, without fuss, as if she'd always been there. The old man on the bench waved when she passed. The little girl on the bicycle called her Lantern Lady with the complete seriousness of a 6-year-old. Marin left extra pastries on her porch. Tom fixed the cracked glass on the 3rd lantern without being asked. And when Clara thanked him, he just shrugged and said, Eleanor would have wanted it done right. The 2nd week was harder. The novelty wore off. The silence got louder. Some nights, Clara lay in bed and wondered what she was doing. She was 29 years old. She had a career, or she used to. She had friends in Boston who texted her and said, "When are you coming back?" And she didn't know how to answer. She missed her favorite coffee shop. She missed her bookshelf, the one she'd built herself. She missed the sound of the subway, which was ridiculous, because she'd hated the subway. But every evening, she walked the harbor path. And every evening she lit the 7 lanterns. And every evening, when she reached the end and looked back at the golden lights curving along the water, she knew. This was where she was supposed to be. On the 14th night, a storm came, not a bad one, just wind and rain, the kind that made the cottage creak and the fire pop. Clara lit the lanterns anyway, because that's what you do. She walked the path in a yellow rain jacket Tom had lent her, the rain stinging her cheeks, the wind trying to blow out the matches. She lit all 7. She stood at the end for a minute, soaked through, watching the flames hold steady against the wind, and she laughed. She was happy. Genuinely, deeply, unexpectedly happy. She ran home, dripping, and made hot chocolate, and sat by the fire, and listened to the rain on the roof, and thought about Eleanor, about Margaret Hale, about all the women who'd walked this path before her, in all kinds of weather, lighting the way for strangers. She was part of something now. Something older and bigger than herself, and it felt like coming home. A month to the day after she arrived, the village had a small gathering on the harbor path. It wasn't planned. It just happened. Marin brought bread and apple cider. Tom brought a folding table. Old Peg brought his whittling and a story. The little girl on the bicycle brought her mother, who brought her little brother, who brought a stick he insisted was a magic wand. They stood along the path as Clara lit the lanterns, one by one. When she reached the 7th, the little girl clapped. The old man on the bench raised his cider. Tom smiled. Marin wiped a tear from her eye and said, "Eleanor would be so proud." Clara looked at them, these people she'd known for a month, who felt like family. And she thought about the woman she'd been in Boston. Tired, anxious, always rushing, always waiting for the next thing. She wasn't that woman anymore. Maybe she never would be again. After everyone left, Clara sat on the weathered bench at the end of the path, the same bench where Margaret Hale had sat, where Eleanor had sat, where old Peg had told her the story. The 7 lanterns glowed behind her. The waves rolled in. The stars came out, one by one, until the sky was full of them. She pulled Eleanor's scarf tighter around her neck. It smelled like lavender still, after all this time. She thought about the journal, about the last letter, about Eleanor's words. You can let the ocean be loud so your mind can be quiet. The ocean was loud tonight. And Clara's mind was quiet. Quiet in a way it had never been. Not empty, not numb, but full. Full of the sound of waves, of the warmth of lantern light, of the taste of Marin's cider, of the memory of Tom's laugh, of the feeling of being exactly where she was meant to be. She sat there for a long time. Long enough for the tide to come in, for the moon to rise, for the first lantern to burn low and need trimming. She got up. She trimmed the wick. The flame steadied, bright and warm. And then she walked home, slowly along the path of lights to the cottage on the cliff, where the fire was still going and the bed was made and tomorrow was another day. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. She didn't know how long she'd stay, or what would happen when the snow came, or whether she'd ever go back to Boston. But she knew this. Tonight, the lanterns were lit. The boats were safe. The cove was glowing, and Clara Bennett was home.